Which pharmaceutical drugs have caused the most unintended health problems, side effects, or deaths?
Well, no question that the most lethal drug prescription epidemic in history is the opioid crisis, because it's been allowed to fester for so long, for so many years, and we have hundreds of thousands dead. There are also instances, remember with the opioid crisis, you're dealing with an addictive product, so that when it was difficult for people who became addicted to OxyContin or one of the fentanyl products to get their drugs through doctors, as the FDA started to make it a little bit more difficult to refill those prescriptions. Where did they go? They went to the street. They bought fentanyl products on the street. They went to heroin in some instances, because OxyContin is chemically very, very similar to heroin. So, you then pushed part of what I call the legal prescription problem into the illegal market as well, and mixed it all together. But there's no doubts that over time, there's been a trail of deaths caused by bad drugs. Everything, from hormone replacement to what we talked about with the pill before, and even things. There was a moment, for instance, in the swine flu epidemic of 1976. What I have a chapter on it. I call it the epidemic that wasn't an epidemic. They thought there was a swine flu outbreak at Fort Dix, New Jersey. It turned out there wasn't. But what did Gerald Ford and the government do? They said, "Uh-oh, swine flu. That's the same thing that hit in 1917, 18. Let's inoculate the entire country." So they got 4 pharmaceutical companies to go ahead and make the vaccine. When those 4 companies, including Merck and Pfizer and others, had 100 million vaccines, the government said, "Give us the vaccines." The 4 companies said, "Oh, not so fast. We want to build into this agreement we have with you a reasonable profit and immunity from all liability for any side effects." The government gave them both of that. And guess what the side effects were when we talk about what happens? It was a thing called Guillain-Barré, which is a neurological syndrome, a rare one. Thousands of people came down with it after 40 million people got the vaccine. So those lives were ruined, and then the lives of those families ruined. I don't like to get into a situation where I say, here are the number of people who fell sick from adverse effects, the number of people who had long-term debilitating effects, or the number of people that died. Because if it happened to you, even if it was 1 out of a million, it's ruined your life. And there are too many instances of that in the pharmaceutical industry history.
Does the pharmaceutical industry have liability for their products, or do they not have liability?
The drug industry does have liability for their products, and the reason I say but, there shouldn't be a but here, because we think they're held responsible for the things that they do wrong. But they're held responsible almost invariably by paying a fine. And that is difficult, because I've never seen a situation in which the drug companies were held to pay a fine larger than the amount of money that they earned on the drug. Even in the case of the Sackler family, the owners of Purdue Pharma, OxyContin, they will walk away with billions of dollars of money earned from OxyContin sales after they have settled all the lawsuits and any threat of criminal liability. They will still walk away with profits no matter how much they pay. And that's the case time and time again. So remember, these are companies that do $500 billion a year in business, the top 10 companies. Nobody's putting them out of business by levying a fine against them. So they are liable, but they aren't liable to the extent that they're stopping their bad actions. They repeat it time and time again.
Are the medical journals accurate, science-based sources of information, or is their information influenced by the pharmaceutical industry?
So the medical journals, from the Journal of the American Medical Association to Lancet to other top medical journals around the globe, they are prone to often having articles filled that are sponsored by drug companies. So, at the end of the article, it says these 3 researchers have the following ties, but they're able to hide those sort of what I call sponsors to the studies from the full disclosure. So we end up too many times with pharmaceutical friendly studies that end up in the medical journals. And guess what? This will be a surprise to no one. If you take a study in the last 20 years, roughly in the last 20 years, of studies that were sponsored by drug companies, about 85% of them tend to be favorable. 85 to 90% are favorable. The results are good. Low side effects and wonderful drug effects. If you take the ones that aren't sponsored by the drug companies themselves, it falls under 50%. About 40% of those tend to be relatively good drugs, and almost 2/3 have problems. It's not just a coincidence. Clearly, the studies that are sponsored that work their way into the process of the medical journals are a problem. And for those of us in the lay world who are trying to decipher which ones are real and which ones might have a slant or a bias to them, it's almost impossible to do. One of the things that I have in the book is that in the early 1960s, the head of the FDA's antibiotic research division was being paid by the Sackler brothers to run a group of magazines that they had, medical journals, and edit them. And it turned out that he was being paid for the number of reprints that were published of those journals. So he was earning a couple of $100,000 a year when that was earning $1 million a year. And he forgot to tell the FDA about all that money. When they find out, they made him step down. He didn't go to jail. He just had to give up his position. So this goes back 60 years ago, and it's still happening today.
Do medical school students learn a curriculum based on the best science or based on information coming from the pharmaceutical industry?
Well, it's a mix of both, and it depends upon the medical school that you go to. So very interesting that you would think that at medical school, you're only learning the latest science, but you have to step back and think, okay, what does that mean? Because there are pharmaceutical companies that make big donations to medical schools. Tufts University, Tufts Medical School was named after the Sackler family, had a Sackler School of Medicine. Now, it wasn't just because the Sacklers wanted their name up in 5-foot granite letters. They had that also in the Metropolitan Museum and a number of other prestigious places, including the Smithsonian. They wanted it up on Tufts because Purdue was able to get a course curriculum that was very friendly to the dispensing of painkillers, and that they really weren't that addictive, and explaining to medical students how they could be used in a whole range of situations. So it's not as though the students at a medical school get a stamp that on their course says Pfizer approved, Johnson & Johnson approved, Sackler approved. It's worked into a curriculum based upon the amount of money that's maybe been donated already to the school, and becomes friendlier to the drugs that are under discussion in the way that the teachers approach it to the medical students. I know that from talking to students who graduated from medical school in the 1980s, they tell me to a person, men and women who are doctors, that they went to school at a time when they were told opioids were very small chance of addiction, 1% to 2%, and they should be widely dispensed for pain. You talk to somebody graduating from medical school in the last 10 years, and they really don't dispense opioids for the most part, even if you've had your wisdom teeth pulled and want to give you a Tylenol instead. So there's a problem in getting a drug, painkiller if you really need it. So you've gone from one extreme to the other. What's taught in medical schools matter. It's how doctors approach dispensing medications when they get out.